spent 31 years as a social worker. And the one thing that job taught me, the one thing that never left me, even after I retired, was how to read a room without letting the room read me back. I know what a smile is hiding. I know what silence means when it comes from someone who used to laugh easily. I know the difference between a woman who is tired and a woman who has been worn down on purpose. I just never thought I would need that skill sitting at my own kitchen table, looking at my own daughter. Her name is Nina. She is 36 years old, and she has her father's eyes. This warm, open brown that used to make strangers feel instantly at ease. She became an occupational therapist. She loves morning walks and bad reality television, and the kind of soup that has to simmer all day. She is one of the gentlest people I have ever known in my life. She met her husband at a fundraiser for a local literacy program. He was volunteering, which impressed her. He was well dressed, well spoken, and knew exactly how to stand in a room full of strangers and make everyone feel like they were his oldest friend. His name is Conrad, and from the very first evening she brought him home to meet me. Something in my stomach went still and quiet in a way I had learned over 3 decades not to ignore. I want to be honest about that. I felt it that first night. He brought flowers. He complimented my home. He asked me thoughtful questions about my career and nodded in all the right places. And when Nina excused herself to check on dinner, he leaned across the table and said to me, "You raised an extraordinary woman. I hope I can be worthy of her." And I smiled, and I said thank you, and I thought, that is a line a person rehearses. But I told myself I was being unfair. I told myself that 31 years of watching people in crisis had made me suspicious of kindness. I told myself that my daughter was a grown woman with a graduate degree and good instincts, and that my job was to trust her. So I did. For a while. They dated for 2 years. He was attentive and generous. He remembered things, the anniversary of her father's passing, her favorite restaurant, the name of her college roommate. Nina glowed. I had not seen her that relaxed in years, and when he proposed, on a quiet evening at the restaurant where they had their first date, she called me before she called anyone else. "Mama," she said, and I could hear her crying, happy crying, the kind that hiccups. He asked me. I told her I was thrilled. I told her he was lucky to have her. Both of those things were true. What I did not say was that I'd already started paying closer attention. It started small, it always does. I know that now better than I know almost anything. The first thing I noticed was that Nina stopped talking about work the way she used to. She used to call me on her drive home and narrate her whole day. A patient who took their first steps, a colleague who said something funny, a frustration she needed to vent. Those calls got shorter, then less frequent. When I asked about her job, she gave me summaries instead of stories. It was fine, she would say. Busy week. I asked her once if everything was okay at the clinic. She said, yes, of course. Why would you ask that? And there was something in her tone, not irritation exactly, but a kind of practiced carefulness that I filed away. Then I noticed that when we made plans, Nina would confirm them, and then, an hour before, something would come up. Conrad meet at her home. Conrad had made reservations. Conrad had made reservations. Robert had already planned their weekend. It happened enough times that I started to brace for the cancellation before it came. My sister noticed it too. Nina used to be the first one to arrive, she told me at Christmas. Now she barely shows up. I watched Conrad at family gatherings. He was always pleasant, always charming. But he had a way of standing slightly too close to Nina when she talked to other people. A hand on the small of her back that looked affectionate until you noticed she would sometimes shift her weight, just slightly, like she was adjusting to pressure she didn't want to acknowledge. He answered questions that had been directed at her. Not every time, just enough. Nina laughed at things he said, even when they weren't funny. I noticed that too. By the time they'd been married 14 months, my daughter had stopped wearing the earrings she had loved for years. These little turquoise drops that her father bought her for her college graduation. I asked about them once, casually. She said she wasn't sure where they were. I didn't push, but I had seen Conrad make a small face when she wore them to his colleague's dinner party the previous spring. Just a small face. Just a flicker. She had seen it too. I started documenting things. I know that sounds calculated, and maybe it was, but 31 years of social work teaches you that memory is not a reliable witness. Feelings fade, timelines blur, and people who want to convince you that you imagined something are very good at using those blurs against you. I kept a notebook. Nothing dramatic, just dates and observations. Nina canceled plans. Conrad answered for her at Thanksgiving. Nina said, We don't really do that anymore. When I invited her to our Chiz annual women's brunch, which she had attended every year since she was 19, the brunch she had never once missed. I want to tell you about a Sunday afternoon in February, about 8 months before the birthday party. I stopped by their house unannounced. I had made a casserole, chicken and rice, her comfort food since childhood, and I told myself I was just dropping it off. But honestly, I wanted to see her without the buffer of advance notice. I wanted to see her when she didn't have time to prepare. Conrad's car wasn't in the driveway. Nina answered the door in a sweater I had never seen before. Oversized, and for just 1 second before she registered who was standing there, her face was completely blank. Not relaxed, not peaceful. Blank, the way a face goes when it has spent too long being careful. Then she saw it was me, and she smiled, and the blank was gone. "Mama, you didn't have to do that," she said, reaching for the casserole dish. "I know I didn't," I said. "I wanted to." We sat at her kitchen table and had coffee, and for about 20 minutes it was almost like it used to be. She told me about a patient, a 60-year-old man who had been relearning how to button his shirt after a stroke. She laughed at herself when she described her own frustration during a difficult session. She was there. My Nina was right there. Then her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and the ease drained from her face like water. "He's on his way home," she said. "Okay," I said. I did not move. She started clearing the cups. "You probably need to get going, Mama. He doesn't like when I have." She stopped. "Started again. He's been stressed about work. It's better if it's just us tonight." I looked at her. She looked at the sink. "Nina," I said, "are you happy?" She turned the faucet on. "Of course I am," she said over the running water. "I'm fine." I drove home, and I sat in my driveway for a long time before I went inside. After that, I started moving differently. I called my old colleague Brenda, not Brenda, the name from any other story, but my Brenda, who had spent 20 years as a family law paralegal before she retired, and who knew more about protective orders and documentation than most attorneys I had ever worked with. I didn't tell her Nina's name. I framed it as a hypothetical. She knew it wasn't. "The most important thing," she told me, "is evidence that exists before the crisis, not after." I heard her. I also called my nephew, who works in IT security, and I asked him, calmly, over Sunday dinner, as if it were purely academic, how someone would go about preserving text messages and voicemails in a format that held up legally. He looked at me for a long moment and then explained it very clearly without asking me why I wanted to know. "I love that boy." And then I waited, because I had learned that the worst thing you can do for someone who is not yet ready to see is to push them toward a door they aren't prepared to walk through. I stayed close. I kept the lines open. I showed up with food, and I asked gentle questions, and I never once said the words I was thinking. The birthday party was my granddaughter's 4th birthday. My son-in-law's daughter from a previous relationship, a sweet, serious little girl named Bea who had decided her favorite color was orange, and her favorite animal was a Komodo dragon, which I respected enormously. Nina had been planning it for weeks. She made a list. She ordered the cake from the bakery on Clement Street, the one that does the custom designs, and she had picked up the orange streamers and the little party favor bags. She was excited. I could hear it in her voice when we spoke the Thursday before. Real excitement, uncalculated. It reminded me of who she was. The party was at their house. Family, mostly, Conrad's sister, Yvette, and her husband, his mother, Adeline, a few of Bea's friends from preschool, and their parents. My sister came with me. We arrived with balloons and a wrapped gift that Bea had specifically requested, which was a book about reptiles. The afternoon started well. Bea was in her element, barefoot, orange ribbon in her hair, commanding the room with 4-year-old authority. Nina was moving through the kitchen and the backyard with that particular grace of a woman who has organized everything and is now trusting it to hold. She looked lovely. She looked tired, but lovely. Conrad was at the grill. He was in a good mood, laughing with his brother-in-law, turning hot dogs with the performance of a man who wanted everyone to notice how relaxed he was. About 40 minutes in, Nina came out of the kitchen carrying a bowl of fruit salad and set it on the table. I was standing near the drink station, and I watched Conrad glance over at her, then at the bowl, then back at her. "I told you to use the other serving bowl," he said. "Not loudly. Quietly. The way you say something when you want only one person to hear it, but you also know others are close enough." Nina's hands went still on the table. "This one was cleaner," she said. "The other one had a small crack." "I told you which bowl, Nina." "Conrad, it's a fruit salad." He set the tongs down, and something shifted in the air. I have felt that shift before, in living rooms and hospital intake rooms and courtrooms, and every cell in my body recognized it. "You always have to do it your way," he said, still quiet, still smiling for the crowd. "You can't just listen." His mother Adeline was standing 4 feet away. She had heard every word. She looked at the bowl of fruit salad and said, pleasantly, "Conrad, you're right, you did mention the other bowl." Nina picked up a serving spoon. Her hand was not shaking, but it should have been. I know what it cost to hold something that still. I excused myself to get a glass of water from the kitchen. Inside, I opened my purse. I took out my phone. I had 2 numbers saved. The first was a family law attorney named Mr. Osei, who had been recommended to me by 2 different colleagues and with whom I had already had one consultation call, framed as a friend situation, 4 months prior. The second was a therapist named Dr. Wynne, who specialized in coercive control and had a sliding scale practice in our neighborhood. I sent a text to Mr. Osei. I said, "I think we're ready to move forward." Then I went back outside and I watched my daughter serve fruit salad to her stepdaughter's birthday guest with a steadiness that broke my heart completely. I want to be very clear about something. I did not rescue Nina. I want no credit for her story because her story belongs to her, and what she built belongs entirely to herself. But here is what happened in the 4 months after that birthday party. I sat down with Nina, just the 2 of us, at a park near our old neighborhood, the one where I used to take her as a child, because I wanted neutral ground and I wanted open sky. And I did not tell her what I had seen or what I suspected or what I thought she should do. I asked her one question. I said, "If Bea grows up and marries someone, what would you want for her?" Nina was quiet for a very long time. The ducks on the pond were being very demanding, and the little boy nearby was feeding them crackers and laughing at them. It was a warm day for November. Then she said, "I'd want her to feel safe." I said, "Yeah, I know you would." That was all I said. I let it sit there. 2 weeks later, Nina called me at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She said, "Mama, I think I need some help." I had Mr. Osei's number ready. I had Dr. Wynn's number ready. I had a list of the documentation she would need and a calm explanation of the steps, because I had done the research over the previous 4 months while I waited for the moment when she was ready to ask. I said, "I know, I've been ready." The divorce process took 11 months. It was not simple. Conrad hired an attorney who was combative and skilled, and there were weeks that were very hard. But Nina had documentation. She had a therapist's notes. She had my records, the dates, the observations, and she had the account of 2 witnesses at the birthday party who had heard the exchange with the serving bowl, including my sister and, unexpectedly, Yvette, Conrad's own sister, who had watched her brother for years and had her own things to say. Conrad lost primary custody of Bea to his former partner, who used the records from the divorce proceedings. Adeline, who had stood in that backyard and validated her son's cruelty over a bowl of fruit salad, sent Nina a letter 6 months later. I read it with Nina. It was an apology of sorts, the kind that mostly explained the sender's own pain. Nina put it in a drawer and moved on. My daughter lives in a small house now, 20 minutes from me, with a yard that gets good morning light. She planted tomatoes in the spring. She started wearing those turquoise earrings again. She found them, she told me, in a coat pocket where she'd hidden them so long ago she had forgotten about it. She runs in the mornings. She calls me on her drive home from work and tells me about her patients and her colleagues and the small good things that happened during the day. Last month she told me about a woman she had been working with, a woman who had spent years making herself small to survive a marriage, and she said, "Mama, I can see her coming back. It's slow, but I can see it." She said it with such tenderness, such recognition. My job for 31 years was to see people clearly and act without panic. I never imagined that the most important work I would ever do would happen not in an office or a courtroom or a crisis center, but quietly, over casseroles and park benches and 11 o'clock phone calls, for the person I love most in the world. To anyone watching who recognizes something in the story, in the fruit salad, in the canceled plans, in the earrings hidden away, I want you to hear this. You are not imagining it, and you are not alone, and the people who love you can be ready, if you let them. You just have to say the words. You just have to say, I think I need some help. That's enough. That's always been enough. What city are you watching from tonight? Leave it in the comments. I read everyone. I think about that park bench a lot. The ducks. The little boy with his crackers. The way Nina sat beside me and went so quiet when I asked her what she would want for Bea. People talk about big moments like they arrive with sirens. Like, you'll know exactly when to act, exactly what to say, exactly how the story will end. But that's not how it works. What I've learned from 31 years of sitting across from people in the hardest chapters of their lives, and then from sitting across from my own daughter, is that the real turning points are almost always quiet. A question asked at the right time, a silence held long enough, a text message sent from a kitchen while a 4-year-old blew out her birthday candles 20 feet away. Carnard believed that control was power, and in the short term he wasn't entirely wrong. He had managed to shrink Nina down, her words, her earrings, her laughter, even the bowl she chose to serve fruit in. He had Adeline in his corner, and Yvette cheering from the sidelines, and he had built a whole architecture of small humiliations so routine that Nina had stopped recognizing them as anything other than the weather. That is what that kind of relationship does. It doesn't announce itself. It adjusts the temperature 1 degree at a time until you forget what warm ever felt like. But here's what Conrad didn't account for. The people who loved Nina were paying attention. And attention, kept steady and patient and undramatic over a long period of time, is its own kind of power. A quieter kind. A kind that doesn't show its hand until the moment it needs to. I did not act out of anger, though I felt it. I did not act out of panic, though there were nights I lay awake with my heart working harder than it should. I acted out of something I can only call clarity, a clear-eyed understanding of what was happening, what Nina would need, and what my role was and wasn't. My role was not to decide for her. My role was to be ready when she decided for herself. That is what I think about when I think about doing right by the people you love. Not the grand gesture, not the dramatic intervention, but the showing up, the noticing, the keeping of careful records in a plain notebook, the quiet call to an old colleague, the years of staying close without crowding. Doing right by someone sometimes looks like patience. It looks like a casserole on a Sunday afternoon. It looks like knowing when to ask one question and then saying nothing else. And Nina, my Nina, who found her turquoise earrings in a coat pocket and put them back on like they had never been gone, she did the hard part herself. She lived through it, she named it, she asked for help, and then she rebuilt, slowly, the way real things get built, not all at once, but piece by piece, morning run by morning run, patient by patient, phone call by phone call home. What Conrad took from her, she earned back. What Adeline stood beside and called acceptable, the truth named plainly and on record. What Yvette cheered for in that backyard, her brother's cruelty dressed up as household preference, didn't survive the light. That's not fate. That's not luck. That's what happens when one person refuses to look away and another person finally finds the courage to speak. I hope if you are watching this and something in the story feels familiar, the canceled plans, the careful tone, the hiding of small things you used to love, I hope you feel even a little less alone tonight. And I hope you know that the people who love you can be ready. You just have to say the words.